Boris Johnson looks like he'll hang on to fight another day. And that's because Tory backbenchers have been pretty reluctant to call for him to resign. But in the past, Tory MPs would demand resignations for much smaller infractions than a Prime Minister breaking rules he made while imposing them on everyone else. One such example was in 2004, when then Chancellor of the Exchequer Gordon Brown scheduled a budget speech to coincide with the Cheltenham Horse Racing Festival. The cries of outrage were deafening.
As political editor of The Spectator, I have reported on numerous controversies at Westminster, but never one quite as divisive as the Chancellor's decision to announce the budget during Cheltenham Week. The move has been greeted with horror by MPs in the House.
It's an absolute national disgrace. And there was a Chancellor of the Exchequer after the war, Stafford Cripps, who had to resign because he gave away some budgetary secrets. This goes far beyond that. This is such an insult to all the thousands of people who will be at Cheltenham, all the devotees of racing, and our four-legged friends. This is a resignation matter, in my view.
A seriously scandalous miscalculation. It shows how the Treasury, who decided this, don't live in the real world where the ordinary man lives. And I'm afraid that Gordon's got his priorities wrong.
He doesn't give a tinker's cuss about the very great institutions of this country. The Mansion House speech, which chancellors have turned up to for generations in white tie. The man turns up deliberately in a lounge suit, disrespecting all concerned. And he's doing the same with the festival. He knows there are lots of proper people who actually want to be there, and some of them are going to have to be in the budget in the House of Commons. I think it's probably deliberate, or he certainly doesn't care.
When that clip first circulated on Twitter, I was wondering if we should show it because I thought maybe it's going to turn out to be a spoof. You know, this is just a kind of brass eye-esque thing and that we were the ones who were tricked. It turns out, though, that this did actually happen. It was the case that politicians, journalists and businessmen were incensed at the clash between the budget and Cheltenham Festival. The Racing Post reported at the time, much to the irritation of those more interested in events in the Cotswolds in mid-March, Brown will be delivering his latest fiscal statement on Queen Mother Champion Chase Day. "I can't believe it. This is a social catastrophe," said the BBC's business editor Jeff Randall, a festival regular now faced with reporting on the likely economic repercussions of the speech instead of enjoying the company of fellow racegoers. If the Chancellor is really serious about being popular in the city, he should rescind this immediately. The magazine also had a quote from Peter Oborne, who you saw at the start of that clip. He said, "It is an outrage and shows that Gordon Brown is losing his grip. It is typical arrogance of the Chancellor, and just as the government are coming out of trouble with the Hutton report to willfully court disaster by this reckless decision to affront the city by this thoughtless, quite frankly, cruel act, sadistic, I almost call it, towards city traders who are forced to stay at their desks on the three most important racing days of the whole year, is diabolical." Now, I have to say, potentially that quote from Peter Oborne and that quote from the BBC business editor is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I will leave open that possibility. But in that clip, we did see a Tory MP call for Gordon Brown's resignation because of a clash between a budget speech and a horse race.
This country has a long history of unhinged behavior from politicians. And also, I mean, I get it. You know, this is how I feel when my friends organize their birthday parties on like reunion episodes of The Housewives. I feel like you should resign from being my friend. Like if you knew me, you wouldn't put me through this. But I'm very hesitant, I would say, actually, to portray this as a fall in standards. You know, let's not forget that, you know, the Blair-Brown government was the same government that was, you know, essentially lied to the British people about the risks of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which led to the unnecessary deaths of 1 million Iraqis. Like, I don't think that standards can actually get much lower than that. I think we should look at this less as a drastic shift and more of as a continuation of what has been true, particularly in recent British history, when we have this particular culture of a very concentrated media that has very concentrated power structures and ownership models, and the kind of direct relationships between tabloid and lobby journalists and the fate of governments. And that is, you know, and what underpins that is this idea that standards are essentially malleable according to broader interests. So, the fake outrage expressed in those clips were rooted in a general desire amongst the establishment to see Gordon Brown done away with. Gordon Brown was by no means left wing, but he was to the left of Blair, which is therefore too left for a Labour leader to be able to survive. And so we see this simultaneous manufacturing of particular crises, like this clash of Cheltenham and the budget speech, but also the suppression of genuine scandal, the suppression of genuine crisis, which we see in the example of the Iraq War. And so what we see is a kind of, when a prime minister is in a honeymoon period for whatever reason, that genuine scandal is suppressed in order to protect them. And when, for whatever reason, the factions within the establishment decide that it's no longer tenable, then crisis is almost manufactured and blown out of proportion. So when we see this interplay of kind of clearly manufactured crisis and suppressed crisis, we have to ask ourselves, what is the broader scenario happening here? In whose interest is it for this to happen now? And I think what's interesting to me is it's not entirely clear, why this honeymoon period for Boris Johnson has ended now. I think there's a chance that, backbenchers and, very right-wing tabloid owners want to kind of put a stop to any further restrictions or anything like that. But I don't really think Boris Johnson was going to go down that path as such. So but clearly there is something, because there is now, the scale of critical coverage that we are seeing was not matched in previous points in history, particularly in Boris Johnson's premiership, when it would have very much deserved it. So I don't think it's so much a decline in standards. It's just a kind of rehashing of the similar techniques by which, people in power are shape the idea of what we should find, what our attention and what our attention should be pointed towards, and what we should find to be outrageous. And that happens both ways. It happens in the manufacturing of particular kinds of scandal and in the suppression of particular kinds of scandal as well.
No, I totally take your point, and especially when it comes to Tony Blair in Iraq, because obviously people have been saying, it's if Boris Johnson misled the House about parties that he should resign. I agree. I think if he misled the House about parties, he should resign. But Tony Blair misled the House about the evidence that there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, right? And that was way more significant than any party in Downing Street. So I think this idea that Boris Johnson is exceptional doesn't really work. That said, there have been people who have resigned for much less than Boris Johnson, and much less than, as you say, Tony Blair, when it came to the statements that he made about Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. I asked today on Twitter what were the smallest infractions that have led to ministerial resignation, and I got some good answers. The three most mentioned were the following. Hugh Dalton was Labour Chancellor in 1947, and on the way to deliver his speech on that year's budget, he told a journalist, "No more on tobacco, a penny on beer, something on dogs and pools but not on horses, increase in purchase tax but only on articles now taxable, profits tax doubled." That market-sensitive information appeared in print approximately 20 minutes before Dalton delivered the information in the Commons, and he would resign the following day. It's, of course, a million miles from us all learning whether we'd spend weeks in lockdown through leaks to the Murdoch press or whichever journalist was favoured by Boris Johnson and Downing Street staff at that moment in time. Next, I have for you, in 2002, Estelle Morris resigned as Education Secretary because she felt she wasn't as good at the job as she thought she'd be. In her resignation letter to Tony Blair, she wrote, "I've learnt what I'm good at and also what I'm less good at. I'm good at dealing with the issues and in communicating to the teaching profession. I am less good at strategic management of a huge department, and I am not good at dealing with the modern media. All this has meant that with some of the recent situations I have been involved in, I have not felt I have been as effective as I should be or as effective as you need me to be." If only Gavin Williamson had responded to his own deficiencies with such humility. Obviously, it'd be a difficult letter to write because although I'm good at this, I'm bad at this. He'd just have to say, although I'm terrible at everything, you made me Education Secretary, which looks just as badly on you as it does on me. I would have respected him, actually, if he'd written that. I want to show you in 2018, Development Minister Lord Bates arrived a minute late to answer an oral question from the Labour peer Baroness Lister, and this is what happened next.
My Lords, with the leave of the House, I wonder if you permit me to offer my sincere apologies to Baroness Lister for my discourtesy in not being in my place to answer her question on a very important matter at the beginning of questions. During the 5 years at which it's been my privilege to answer questions from this dispatcher box on behalf of the government, I've always believed that we should offer rise to the highest possible standards of courtesy and respect in responding on behalf of the government to the legitimate questions of the legislature. I'm thoroughly ashamed at not being in my place, and therefore I shall be offering my resignation to the Prime Minister with immediate effect. I do apologise.
Adjourned debate on the amendment to the motion for second reading of the European Union Withdrawal Bill. Lord Hague of Richmond.
On that occasion, Prime Minister Theresa May did not accept the resignation. Bates stayed in post. But still, these should all be lessons for Boris Johnson when it comes to taking responsibility.